Hello world! Have you ever wanted to find the largest file on a USB or hard drive, or use heic files in PowerPoint photo albums via a bulk load? Are you interested in learning how Python and PyCharm works and could assist with such tasks? Well, look no further. That's what this video is for. Enjoy! In summary, this video is about how we can use Python for converting photos from heic into PNG, because at the moment it doesn't work for PowerPoint photo albums, and also how to extract data from hard drives or folders using Python. So as I mentioned, heic files cannot be used within PowerPoint, so I'll go through a demo on how that currently works. And also, if you want a truly random photo album, it's good to be able to randomize the naming, which I'll also use Python for as well. And I'll go through how that code works and a demo of the graphical user interface that I've built using Python. I'll also go through a file size tool, as current file managers don't actually tell you what the largest file is. But if you're trying to find the biggest file in a drive, for example, it's quite tricky to do that. So Python has a graphical user interface which is called Tkinter that can be built to assist with navigating file and folder structure, and also to extract to spreadsheets so that you can sort and do pivot tables and things like that, as well as converting heic files into PNG. But how does that work? So in PowerPoint, if we were to insert a photo album, editing the current photo album, we're already in one, we then click on File Disk. So as you can see within PowerPoint, I've gone into this toFix folder within Photos. It actually does contain 4 heic files, but they are not considered compatible within PowerPoint for photo albums. And also, if you were to, for example, to just rename them, so these are file names, so if I rename them to JPEG or PNG, so if I sort by type and choose the JPEGs, it won't actually allow you. So each one you've got to say it's a JPEG, but it still won't actually allow you to do it. And likewise, if you do the same thing for a PNG file, which is what I've done here, I've just renamed it to a PNG. Even though I'm saying it's a PNG file, it won't allow you to do that either. So you can't actually just physically rename the file, you've actually got to convert the file into a PNG file. Okay, so here is my Python code on the left and my user interface on the right. So I think it might be easier to go through the user interface. How does this work in relation to the code? So you'll see on the left here, we start off, it's actually on line 540 in my particular code, where I've got frames, and they also have a grid layout. So the grid tells you which row, which column within that grid that I'm taking as input from the person using it. And then I'm also outputting into a text area down here. So hence we've got the path label, the path entry is the label and the entry, the different buttons, the different frames. And you also notice that there's a clear output button down here. So the clear output just basically clears the output text area there. And then I'm adding each of those buttons onto the grid as per the layout, so that we can see all the buttons in a nice area. And I've also added some scroll. There's a vertical scroll and a horizontal scroll. So from the beginning, we start with the import. We've got datetime, Excel, Pixel, what's called OpenPixel, which is your Excel manipulator. Tkinter is for the graphical user interface. Then we've got OpenPixel worksheet for tables, as well as there's a path library to manipulate through the paths or the folder structure, the OS library, random to get the random strings, as well as the string library, and the heic to PNG library. And I've also added a sound option as well. So I've got the version string, which is this version 1.0 up here. We have some global variables that I'm using throughout the program. The about function basically just says who I am. I haven't put my email in there, as well as there's a help button. So you can see that each of those basically just calls this about function versus help function with a different text. There's the clear button. So as I mentioned, this clear button down here clears using that. So it basically just says the text output deletes everything from 1 to end. And it's actually using a float, which is why it has to be a 1.0, which is a bit of a weird function, that one. I've also got a function for incrementing a row counter, because quite often we do this, but we also want to make sure that we don't go above the maximum, which I actually did experience when I was running this program over my C drive, and there's so many files that it actually hit the maximum integer. So I've created a function to deal with that. So if, for example, we do approach that maximum amount, then we'll just say there's no more allowed, and then we return 1. And wherever we're calling this function, we're checking if it returns 1, then do nothing, otherwise continue. So the first button, show files in entered path. So in this case, as you can see here, it's got path, examples C drive or C drive temp, or leave blank for current folder. So I've left it blank. I'm in the current folder of D drive Python file manager, and it's found 3 folders, and there's only one file, which is this file manager.py, which is in fact is the file that I'm currently in. So at the moment, there's only one file with those 3 different folders. And so these photos that I'm going to convert into the photo album will be under this photos folder. So you can see here, first we use that function where I mentioned we basically clear the screen because we don't want to append to the end of the screen. We're then looking at the current folder that we're in, which is the initial directory. We then try, have they entered a path? If they have entered a path, then we strip it and we put it into a variable, which is called entered path. Otherwise, we throw up an error that they entered some sort of value which is not a string. So it could be a number, for example. We then start incrementing a file counter. So as you can see, when I show files, it actually shows files processed as 1. We check if there's an entered path of nothing. Then there's an empty string for showing the current folder, which is what it's saying here, in which case we then loop. This 4 files in path.glob is actually looking through every file in that path, basically checking, is that a file? And if it is a file, then we grab the modified time, we grab the modified date out of the modified time. I'm using Australian date formatting here. We then also append it to our text output, as well as incrementing the file count. So that's how I generally do it in terms of getting how many files you're processing, because it can be a lot, and it could just be nice to know how many files you did see at that particular time. It's a little bit different when we're extracting to an Excel, which I'll get to as well. We then output the number of files processed, and then we go into the folders. So you can see here the folders are, and we're prepending the folder only text. So it just makes it a bit easier to immediately see that these are all folders. And I'm also putting the path in there. So that becomes useful if you actually want to use a path. For example, if I want to see all the files in my photos folder, I can paste the path in there and then go show files in entered path, and there you go. So there are my files, and you can see I've already applied the random naming of those files and the photo album PowerPoint that I was presenting, and also that I will use to import these files once they're converted. So at the moment, these PNG files have been converted, but I'm going to run another conversion in a toFix folder, but it's called this one here, toFix. So you can see here that there are 4 files, these 4, and they are all heic files, and there are no folders in that folder. So the folder count as well increments if it is a folder, and then it displays how many folders we've actually looked at. We can try certain things like, is it a directory? If there's certain things like a permission error, for example, which is really useful when you're traversing through the file contents of a C drive, for example, we can actually say you can't access that. So we can just put it out on the text box here, but we just won't put it into a spreadsheet, which is different code, as I mentioned. I've also got some code which is sort of a debugging code to say where are we. We're currently working in this entered path folder, but I've commented it out because we don't really need that at the moment. So the difference here is this first one is if the entered path is empty, then we'll go through and grab all that data. If it's not empty, then there's a bit of extra code where we're actually testing the folder, the path that you put in, and then we're going into that path and then extracting the data out of that path. So you could make this a bit faster and have it as its own little function, but I prefer to do it separately just to keep it a bit easier to manage. And then you can tweak it, and so you could improve on that. So then we go into the text output, the files processed, the folders processed, and then there's a folder count as well. So the folder count will then show how many folders, which is this folder count code. So to export files from path, this is not actually available from a button because this is actually using an entered path as an attribute going into that function. So what we're doing here is we're passing in a path and then going through that path, grabbing all the files, putting it into a spreadsheet. So you can see here into an incremented row count into different columns in the spreadsheet. And then we've also got a modified date, and that's what we're actually showing at the end here, 23rd, and so on. So then we've got text output, processing folders within. So this is, as I mentioned, this function is actually exporting into a spreadsheet. So it's a little bit different. It'll show as it's going through each folder, so you can sort of follow it. So then to export files, for example, it actually creates the workbook and the worksheet within the workbook, and it makes that active. It starts the row counter. The first row is already defined by these headings. So we've got a folder path, file name, size, and updated on. And then we populate each of those columns through the previous function that I mentioned. So it's trying each folder and each file. So it's being called in here, this export files from path with the entered path. So there is a recursion happening, by the way, here, export files from path where the entered path is nothing. So that is done at the start. As you go into a folder, it's exporting all the files from the current folder and then finding all of the folders within the folder and then passing each of those folders in. So there's a, we call that recursion because it's actually calling itself export files from path with this empty string, export files from path with an entered string. Whereas the export files, which is actually connected to the button here, and I will actually run that now, by the way. So I'll just export files in entered path. So I'll put empty. So we're going into the Python folder, and this is what I mentioned, where it's actually showing where we are as we're going through the different folders. We're updating the folders, processing the files, and so on. I'm not actually showing the counters of the different strings there, but you get the idea. So now this is the spreadsheet that I've just created through clicking that button. If I was to expand all of these columns, you can then see all of the folders as well as all of the files within each of those folders. So if I then insert a pivot, grab all the data, we can then pull down the folder path and then grab the size. It automatically sums the size. So you can see here, we can then sort by size, largest to smallest. So we can see the photos folder has 51 meg, file name change only has 29 meg, and so on. Largest to smallest, so you can see the 3 PNG files have the largest, and these are actually the ones that I fixed originally that I mentioned. I am also going to fix the ones in the to-fix folder. So if I just filter that, we can see all the files within that folder. So heic stands for high efficiency image container file. All right, so back to the code. So the exporting files is running the query over the different paths as it's going through each of the paths. It then exports into the table, and then each of the queries populates the rest of the data, and then we convert the data into a table. So you can see here it's getting the row count to find the last row of the data to convert into a table. If we were to show heic files, there, so there we go, there's the 4. Now if we convert heic files in an entered path, it will actually go through that. Okay, so now that we've run the file, you can see that it's sort of hanging the computer because it's running while we're still using other processes. So you can see here that it's processing each file. So the show heic files will actually go through the folder that you've entered, similar to the code we showed previously, but it will only look for this star.heic, and if it finds one, it'll increment the heic file count as well as show the data on that file. So that's how we know that there are heic files in there. I also don't allow for converting heic files on the current folder. If I go convert heic, empty string was entered, this function only works on entered paths. So that's in order to manage your files into a subfolder, and then you can use that through showing the files of the entered path. To convert the heic files, we've got the tone that we set once the conversion is completed. We check the path. For each file, we're processing it. So you can see here, it's actually calling it out, printing it that it's processed. We then have our sound. So the next code I was going to show is how to randomize the files. So if I show the folders in there, I'm going to randomize in the to-fix folder. So we click randomly rename files, and you can see that it's actually got the old name, EA, renamed to IA. So the random string is just putting in the length, and then for the numbers in the length, it's then randomizing each letter and then creating a string and returning a string.